Greetings from the Idaho Bluegrass Association. This is Gary Eller speaking from his home in Pickles Butte, Idaho. We have prepared a series of podcasts based on interviews of people with deep roots in Idaho who rose to national prominence or otherwise made a significant impact on bluegrass music in Idaho. This series of podcasts is a collaboration between the Idaho Bluegrass Association, Idaho Songs Project, National Old Time Fiddlers Association, and Utah State University.
Welcome, bluegrass lovers. This is Mike Murray, and you heard Gary do the introduction to the podcast, and he's been doing the podcast all along and this year, and we've had some great guests, as you're aware, and so we decided that we're going to do a podcast today on Gary Eller. And if you recall, the purpose of the podcast are to talk about folks with deep connections in Idaho that have made a significant contribution to bluegrass music, and especially bluegrass music in Idaho. And certainly I think Gary defines that. A lot of our listeners here know Gary or have heard of Gary Eller. Not only is he a musician, but also very much project coordinator, manager, but involved in a lot of projects and events that go on related to music and storytelling here in Idaho. And also, I'd call Gary a music historian. Certainly a lot that he's done to preserve particularly early music heritage in Idaho and as well as West Virginia. Gary, welcome.
Good to have you here, Mike.
Let's start in the early days. I know you were born and raised in West Virginia, and certainly that would be a large influence on your music, and maybe just tell us a little bit about growing up in West Virginia.
Well, West Virginia is an amazing state musically. I like to think about it as one of those musical crossroads that it takes to have really such fertile musical roots. You think of Chicago or New Orleans or Memphis, Austin, where different cultures come together. That's true of West Virginia. It's the first state as you head south where blacks and whites work together really closely in the mines and the mills. It's where the industrial north meets the agricultural south, and it's where the east meets the Great Plains, or the Midwest at least. And it's lots of rivers, which are always fertile for stories too, and very rural. So that gave rise to lots of forms of music and variations.
So what age did you start playing?
Oh, probably seriously maybe 12 or 13. First banjo was a tenor banjo. After about a year, I figured out that Don Reno played a 5-string, not a 4-string. So the pre-war Gibson archtop master tone tenor banjo I sold for $100, but I bought it for $50, so we felt pretty good about that. So yeah, and there was a tobacco chewing mountaineer named Brady Colvin lived near us, good friend. He was kind enough to show me things. He was the best banjo and fiddle player in the county. Another guy who was a big deal in the hillbilly scene in the 50s and 40s named Gay Schwing, fabulous vocalist. Another person that was really important. I don't know why, but they seemed to enjoy letting me hang out with them and show me things.
So WWVA, that was in Willing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a radio station, as I recall. Is it still a radio station, is it?
It is, but they don't do country music anymore. Their radio, Saturday night Wheeling Jamboree started around 1927, same time the Grand Ole Opry ran.
So that was a live show.
It was a live show, right. And it ran well into the 80s, so it had a really long run. There were a number of those. There was the Barn Dance in Chicago and a few other things, similar shows that started in the 20s. The last two standing were the WWVA Jamboree and the Grand Ole Opry. Now it's just the Opry.
And you got to play on the Jamboree. Is that
I
right?
did one time. Kind of crazy. I probably was 16 or so, maybe 17. My friend Gay Schwing knew Mac Wiseman well, and Mac was running the Jamboree programming. He was the manager of the whole show. And so Gay said, well, hey, you want to go play on the Jamboree? Sure, why not? So, well, let me call Mac. Hey, Mac, I want to bring this kid up and have him play a banjo, and I'll sing a couple songs, okay? Sure, come on up. So we went up, and there we were, and guess who followed us? It was the Stanley brothers. Carter was still alive. This was about 2 weeks before he died. So we did our songs, then the Carters, Ralph and Carter and the boys, came out and sang and did a powerful job, but you could tell something was definitely wrong with Carter. And sure enough, he didn't last much longer.
Then you went to high school there, and then you went off to college. Did you play with any bands in high school then? Or?
I do occasionally do small things with Gay and Brady, and there was a square dance band there. Occasionally I would sit in on once in a while, but it wasn't until graduate school in Columbus, Ohio, that I really fit into a band, and I became the token hillbilly in a band called the Rebel Nosepicks. Everybody else was an urban folk revivalist, wanting to sound like me, I guess.
What years would this have been?
67 to 71. Then off to New Mexico, and that's when I really got into bands. I started to work at Los Alamos National Laboratory and got the itch to play bluegrass, put a little ad in the paper, and 4 guys showed up, and we formed the Atomic Grass.
A great name for Los Alamos, New Mexico, right?
It is. And that band is still running after well over 40 years.
Different band members or still some of the same folks?
There are a couple of guys who are original, I believe.
Is that right?
Yeah.
In New Mexico, then you were there for
30 years.
30 years.
And Atomic Grass played a lot. We did, festivals throughout New Mexico, lots of private gigs. I had my fling with playing country rock. That was the big thing in the 80s. My elder daughter, Audrey, turned out to be a good singer. And so we did a lot of daddy-daughter stuff, gigging around cafes and things like that. And 2004, I moved up here to Idaho.
What made you move to Idaho? What was the draw?
Well, I'd been running rivers here since the mid-'70s, rafting.
Okay.
So I'd run the salmon many times, and then my daughter Audrey went to school at Seattle University. Then I had a work detail at the high-level nuclear waste tank problem in Hanford. So I lived in Tri-Cities, Washington for 2.5 years. So from all of that, I knew the Pacific Northwest pretty well. Mm-hmm. And we decided that's where we wanted to be in retirement.
What were your first things when you got here? Did you get involved with bands?
Well, I saw a piece in the paper about a jam session in somewhere in Eagle. And I went down there, and this guy named Marv Quinton was there. And we hit it off, and he came out here, and we spent an entire day sitting on this very porch where we're having this interview. We each had a 1972 Martin D28 guitar. This is too good to be true. So we formed a little duo, and sometimes we'd add a third person. It was called Bona Fide, and we played a lot for about 2 years. And then Marv went off to Alaska to help his son set up a business. Well, I just kept playing here and there until the opportunity to join Chicken Dinner Road came along.
Well, let's talk about the bands a little bit. You played with Marv a little bit, and then then Chicken Dinner Road was basically the next band?
Pretty much.
And what year what was that formed? What about approximately?
Oh, Lord, I'm trying to remember.
You guys have been together for over 10 years, right?
Yeah, I was the second banjo player in Chicken Dinner Road. Bill Cates was the first. And Bill left the band, and I got interviewed, and they hired me on. At that point, Rue Frisbee had replaced the original fiddle player. Rue and I were the 2 new guys. It was right after the Buckhorn Mountain Boys broke up, and Rue was looking for a job, somewhere around 2008.
Of course, Rue, Mr. Frisbee, we did a podcast on not too long ago. So that was, if our listeners haven't heard that one, they ought to listen to that one. Rue's got a fascinating background and is quite the musician. So Chicken Dinner Road certainly is a well-known, popular group here in Idaho. You call yourself progressive bluegrass. For our listeners, how would you define Chicken Dinner Road?
Well, we don't quite know how to describe it other than to say we play music that we like using bluegrass instruments. And a pure traditionalist probably wouldn't consider us a band that does Fat Bottom Girls, a real bluegrass band. But we try to play 1 or 2 songs each set that shows that we haven't forgotten where we came from. So we do a lot of original music, take music from many, many different genres without apology. After all, Bill Monroe did the same thing. You think about Bill Monroe, he was nothing if not a revolutionary.
Yeah, certainly if you look at Bill Monroe, I mean, one of his greatest influence were the African Americans in the South and what we would call country blues. Certainly that was a big influence on his music over the years. So,
without a doubt.
Yeah. So, well, let's talk about the bands a little bit, and then get into the some of your other activities here. Chicken Dinner Road, you guys have been around. You've toured. Certainly, again, I've seen you multiple times here in the Idaho area.
A little bit. We had one swing back to Tennessee and Kentucky some years ago. Something that Dennis Stokes, our band leader, set up through some business arrangements. We played as far west as western Washington, Utah, south end of Nevada, North Idaho. That's Oregon. So, all over the Pacific Northwest, and occasionally a little bit further than that. So there have been times we were really active. We'd be playing 2 or 3 times a week. Even before COVID came along, we all decided because of personal circumstances, we need to dial that thing back. We dialed that back, and then COVID came along. We probably wouldn't have played much anyway during the COVID period. And now we're back, and we've decided we're going to limit our playing to about once a month and be pretty selective about gigs. We just spent 2 days at the Yellow Pine Festival, and that was an absolute hoot. So we played on the big stage, on the small stage. We played both bars there, way into the night. So it was like good old times.
Well, you guys are having a good time. That's what counts, right?
Yeah.
And then just for our listeners, Chicken Dinner Road has a website.
Yes, and you can check us out on Reverb Nation too.
How many recordings or albums have you?
I've been involved with 4, I believe.
Okay.
And there were a couple before that. So there's half a dozen Chicken Dinner Road CDs, but the more stuff you hear on Reverb Nation will be more recent stuff. That's the lineup that's been intact for 11 years with John Blakley and L.B. Robertson.
Yeah,
it's been a very stable band, which is really amazing. Not too many bands can go that long without a change in personnel.
Well, let's go ahead and hear an example of Gary's fine banjo playing. This is a song that Gary wrote. It's called Chicken Fingers. It's an instrumental that he plays with Chicken Dinner Road. So we've got Gary on the banjo, we've got Dennis Stokes on mandolin, L.B. Robertson on guitar, John Blakley on bass, and Rue Frisbee on fiddle. Again, the name of the song is called Chicken Fingers, and it's off of their Off the Beaten Path album. Well, you've got a couple other, I guess we call them bands going on, the Old Fatherings.
The Old Farthing. So that's an occasional thing. It's mainly a Weezer thing, and we're just old friends. Like 3 requirements. You have to be over 70. You have to know a million pre-1950 songs, and you have to play an instrument that has a banjo head on it. We yuck it up. We always do jobs at Weezer. Charlie Simmons is one of the mainstays in it. So I've got that. I've got in a group called Wilder with Jay Fromlath, and that band does almost nothing except pre-1970 country music and bluegrass. Getting back into my real wheelhouse. I'm from the era where, in the 50s, where there was no distinction made between country music and bluegrass. And I still look at it that way. There's so many songs that were recorded both ways, and still are. The only difference is the instrumentation. There was a song on a previous podcast by Honey Deaton called Send Me the Pillow You Dream On. It's a beautiful song, whether you use a banjo or a steel guitar on it. That's my roots. And, as you get older, most people tend to revert back to where they came from.
Let's talk about Weezer a little bit. I guess there's a common thread here with the podcasts that have been done to date, and that is everybody that we've talked to, that you've talked to and been on the podcast, have had some experience with Weezer, which is kind of the common thread. So why don't you talk a little bit about your Weezer experience? When did you first find out about Weezer and your involvement?
I probably had heard of Weezer when I was in West Virginia. Certainly I knew about it well by the time I got to New Mexico, but I never got to go until we moved here. And I didn't know what to expect. I just assumed it was a fiddle contest like I'd seen elsewhere. So I'm wrong about that. There is the National Fiddle Contest, of course, which is fantastic. But I found about half the people who go there, first of all, there were thousands of people there. And secondly, about half of them never went to the fiddle contest. They stayed there and jammed. And the musicianship was so far beyond anything I'd ever seen at a bluegrass festival anywhere else, any kind of music festival. So, it was like love at first sight. And I learned about so many famous professional musicians that came out of there. It's just something you want to be around if you play any form of acoustic music. And I wound up being on the board of the fiddle contest for 5 years. Kind of led the effort to restore Slocum Hall, which the fiddle contest owns. It was at that time a decrepit old boys' dormitory. And we got about 20 rooms restored, and that was enabled us to run music camps there. So we started with banjo camps, and then we also expanded that to guitar, mandolin, and voice camps, songwriting workshops. And I believe that's where the IBA Bluegrass Camp was supposed to be this very month.
Yeah.
So all of that was very, very satisfying. So now I'm just one of everybody else up there, and it's kind of nice to step back from carrying the baton and leading the parade.
The work that's gone up on Slocum Hall's been a major improvement. It's just an amazing place, a lot of history. Again, if our listeners haven't had the opportunity to go through there, it's a great place to visit, going through the hall and seeing just the pictures of the fiddle players that have been over there over the years and how many you recognize, but also the camps that have been up there, the music camps that have been up there over the years, some really great, successful ones. And then besides the camps, you've been involved with the banjo contest.
Oh, yeah, that one is dear to my heart. So we started out, remember the first year I had to practically beg Kim Ray and Bill Devereaux to come up and play so we'd have 3 people for a competition. Of course, they each won a trophy, right? Because we only had 3 trophies. Last year, it was limited to fiddle plus banjo competition. I think we had 15 entries for that competition alone. There were some tremendous players there this year. So I'm glad I'm not seriously competing anymore. 3 years ago, Katrina Nikolai and I teamed up in the fiddle and banjo contest and won first place.
There you go.
And last night, Katrina, the great Katrina, 6-time winner of the fiddle contest at Weezer, won the Grand Masters fiddle contest in Nashville, Tennessee. So if you go to Weezer, you get to play with people of that kind of caliber. They're out there in the campgrounds, roaming around. That's a rare opportunity, and it's inspiring to be around. And to actually be able to play with them is really special.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your other projects that you've been involved with. The Idaho Song Project, have been involved with that, and maybe tell the listeners here a little bit about that.
Yes, I mentioned that I love event ballads, story songs, whether it's a bluegrass song like John Henry or the Edmund Fitzgerald, Ballad of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I love those songs, And a well-written song like that, every line in the song has meaning if you understand the storyline. You just think about Edmund Fitzgerald. Every line in that beautifully written song is written by somebody who knew what he was talking about. So I got to Idaho, and of course I started looking for I could only find one of those, one event ballad, true event ballad for Idaho, a song called Way Out in Idaho. And it was a work song about putting in the Oregon Short Line Railroad that connects Pocatello to Ontario, Oregon. It's a great song, but I knew there were more.
In what year was that song written?
1883, really late in the history of this. I mean, there have been railroads in Pennsylvania for 50 years by then. So I thought, well, that just can't be right. They've got to be out there. So I got a small grant from the Idaho Humanities Council, some gas money to go around and turn over some rocks to see what I could find. So here we are a couple hundred songs later. It's been one of the most rewarding things I've done musically in my life. It takes me all over the state. I meet amazing people. I found amazing songs, and I can still count on one hand the number of those songs that came from living people.
Let's listen to an example from the Idaho Songs Project. This song is called Shadowy St. Joe. This is a song where Gary wrote both the music and the lyrics for. It's based on celebrating the Sunday family excursions that occurred over 100 years ago between Lake Coeur d'Alene and the head navigation of St. Mary's on a steamboat called the Georgie Oaks. On this song you will hear Becky Blake singing harmony with Gary.
Georgie Oaks a-gleamin', Captain Baker's beamin', gliding up the shadowy St. Joe. Coeur d'Alene's behind us, St. Mary soon will find us, docked along the shadowy St. Joe. St. Mary's folks are standing to greet us by the landing, debarking from the shadowy St. Joe. A picnic we brought to eat, then shopping for a special treat to take home from the shadowy St. Joe. Oh, can't you see the little children waving from the shore, cheering when the steamboat whistle screams at them once more? White pines a-burning, stern wheels a-churning, gliding along the shadowy St. Joe. To the shore, ore and lumber brought aboard to take back down the shadowy St. Joe. Tall trees above us, river otters make a fuss, playing in the shadowy St. Joe. Crystal waters make us smile. Coeur d'Alene in just a while will soon debark the shadowy St. John. Back to work tomorrow, we leave the boat in sorrow. What fun upon the shadowy St. John. Oh, can't you see the little children waving from the shore? Cheering when the steamboat whistle screams of them once more. White pines are burning, stern wheels are churning, gliding along the shadowy St. John.
And then you also did something similar to this in West Virginia, right?
West Virginia has been worked over by musicologists and folklorists so heavily. Not just because it's interesting, but because it's really close to Washington, D.C. and other population centers in the East. So I found a couple of songs, and I thought, gee, is it possible they missed some things? And so I started again turning over some rocks, and sure enough, I found, as an example, the classic murder ballad, Willow Garden, or Rose Connolly. Mm-hmm. I found out it was first documented in my home county in Wetzel County, West Virginia.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so I started looking a little deeper, and gee, there were, that was a pretty rich place. I didn't know that when I was growing up, and nobody there now knew it. Or when I first started working, trying to find these songs, nobody there even thought about looking for them. So I guess there's no ground that's totally infertile if you keep plowing enough.
Well, certainly it's a major contribution to Idaho and certainly West Virginia as well. So for our listeners, you definitely need to check that out. Let me just do one thing here. I did want to say that the 2020 Governor's Award of Arts for the Support of Arts, Gary was given that award. And that was, again, associated with much of the work that he's doing with the Idaho Song Project and basically, as well as his work that he's done up in Weezer. So congratulations on that. That was well earned. So let's kind of wrap things up here a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the Idaho Bluegrass Association and also kind of where bluegrass and roots music's going here in Idaho. And one of the observations I've made with the podcasts that you've done is that a lot of them have started early, playing early. You started playing fairly early age, and Rue and others basically grew up with music, and I don't know if it was Rue or one of the other guests that you had on, basically. And I know Joel Castleman is another good example, great musician, and he grew up actually in the outback of Australia. And he got started early, and as he said to me one day, he said, I had nothing else to do. He said, we had nothing to do in the outback. And I think there was that music was something the family did, but it was also something that, it kept the kids entertained and something to do.
Rue and I talk about this a lot. We both grew up in really rural areas. We didn't pay a lot of attention. We didn't get a TV until the mid-50s or something like that. And then we didn't pay that much attention to it. So you had to kind of make your own amusement. And so I think people of my generation, that's probably a pretty common thing. And it's probably one of the problems that gets harder to attract really young people's attention these days. There's so much instant gratification. And becoming a musician is not instant gratification. It helps tremendously to have older mentors around. That was true in Joel's case too, because I think his family played music. Certainly true for Rue, true of Honey Deaton. But there are counterexamples like Marv Quinton, who came into it late in life too and just got hooked. But in the long run, you've got to figure out how to hook young people for this to continue. And there's so many really unbelievably good young professional musicians out there, now. The level of playing just gets higher and higher all the time. So the challenge for IBA, I think, is to figure out how to create more Honey Deatons. She grew up with music, came back to Idaho. That's the grand challenge to me. How do you do that? Probably can't do it in the same way that Rue and I learned. It has to be something different. And that's another thing that's really great about Weezer, because it's such a family-friendly environment. All the years I've been going there, I've never heard of a kid problem. I've never seen an obnoxious drunk there. I've only seen one drug-related unpleasantness, which is saying a lot, out of that many people. I think more events like that is what you need to do. So the kids, not that they're going to sit there and play, but they just see older people having a blast playing music, and maybe they see another 7-year-old that's really ripping it up on fiddle or banjo. That's how it happens. I wasn't pushed into music. I just saw that, man, that looks pretty cool.
Right.
I want to learn how to do that.
Got to show an interest and then really develop a passion to really do it.
That can't happen in bars.
Well, certainly the camps that you've been part of, and I think those are the ones to certainly continue to do those and try to push those as well. And I guess the encouraging thing that I see is that there are some young musicians, and by young I mean teenagers in their 20s here in Idaho as well as nationally, that are coming up that are just phenomenal. When we do go to these bluegrass, particularly the larger bluegrass festivals, there's a lot of young folks there. So I think there's that interest, so we'll continue to try to plug away at it.
So but a lot of the festivals you're talking about probably are outdoor festivals, right?
Yes.
A lot of camping.
Yep.
They're inherently kid-friendly. Mike and Terry Conroy, Mike runs the Montana Bluegrass Association. They've run something called the Hard Times Festival. They just go out into the woods. They set up a little stage. I mean, it's out in the Lodgepole Pines. They had 1,000 people at their festival this year. There's a hunger out there for that. And again, it's one of those things where the kids can run amok and there's music all over the place. That's going to affect some of them positively. So Weezer is kind of along those lines, and that's why I think rural events like that are really great. It's certainly, if you go to like Wintergrass, that's an adult event. That's not to say you shouldn't cater to the older people too. In the long run, you've got to snag a few of the younger people.
Well, Gary, I appreciate you talking to us today. And anything else to say, words of wisdom to our folks listening to the podcast?
No, just keep on picking and don't narrow your musical boundaries too much. It's all good. And keep in mind that bluegrass was a revolution. Music's always a journey, not an end point. And it will continue to evolve whether you participate in that evolution or not.
Well, thanks, Gary. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye.